Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is once again time for an all-new Front 7 podcast for Sunday, July 5th, and finally, I am going to get to the NFC Draft reactions. I am your host, Money Mike, and, well, as I said, July 5th. That means we are only a couple months away now from football season. So, yeah! Before we get to football season, we got the preseason in August, and then training camp coming up at the end of the month. In which case, not only is this going to be the NFC Draft reaction show, I am also going to discuss training camp holdouts. Every year we see it. Players, they hold out for more money, specifically the guys that get tagged with the franchise tag, like Dez Bryant, who has threatened to sit out games for no reason whatsoever. It's funny because the tag deadline is also coming up later this month, so the reports are saying that the Cowboys and his agent are talking, try to get something done. But we'll see where that goes. Like I said, Dez Bryant has threatened to hold out and sit out even in the regular season. Go out west to Seattle. Michael Bennett, who just got a 4-year contract last year, is already wanting a new contract 1 year in. So, as I discuss training camp holdouts, I pose a question to not only to the people listening, to the NFL players who make millions of dollars, and they're upset because so-and-so's making $1 million more, making $2 million more, or, quote-unquote, as the reports say on Russell Wilson, he wants to be the highest paid player. Interesting. So, and also throw in, he wants to play baseball, in which he just told Jimmy Kimmel that he might be interested in playing baseball even more if he were to have his rights traded to the Seattle Mariners. So what do you do if you're the Seahawks? That's going to be very interesting to see what happens in Seattle. You got Wilson coming up, you got Michael Bennett wanting to hold out for more money. But that is a discussion for tomorrow, because I am breaking this up into 2 parts. This will be the first half filled with my NFC draft reactions, and I will finish my draft reactions tomorrow, along with my big discussion on training camp holdouts. So, without further ado, let's start off with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Jameis Winston as I begin my Around the League NFC Draft reaction. Now, for months, we pretty much knew Jameis Winston was going to be the number 1 pick. There was no question about it. I mean, there was reports about Marcus Mariota versus Jameis Winston. So, we'll have to see how it goes heading into this season and how things play out in the preseason because, well, we're not going to have to wait long for Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota to face off, because they face off in week 1. After they took Winston with the first overall pick, they came back and took Donovan Smith, offensive tackle out of Penn State. Now, I will say, I did like the fact that Tampa Bay is trying to shore up the offensive line to protect Jameis Winston. It seems everybody's trying to copy what Dallas has done, and Dallas did overexpanded 3 drafts. As I will get to later on, the Rams, well, they're trying to get it all in one draft because they just drafted a bunch of offensive linemen. But Tampa Bay also did the same thing. They came back and took Ali Marpet at the end of round 2. Right tackle DeMar Dotson, he ended his holdout, so now he's in at right tackle. The plan is for Donovan Smith to be at left tackle. Maybe Ali Marpet might be there in guard or center. So that's going to be 2 rookies on the offensive line for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, potentially in week 1 when they faced the Titans and Marcus Mariota. Now, the other pick I will say I liked was Kenny Bell out of Nebraska, round 5. I thought that was a great pick. The funny thing to me is that this whole draft was pretty much offensive. There really wasn't anybody defensive except for Quan Alexander out of LSU. So I do kind of question what the Tampa Bay defense is going to be, because they did put a lot into the offense. You know, I've said it before, it's a passing league, so I can see why. But, you know, it's just Atlanta did that a couple years ago with Julio Jones, and they traded away so many picks that they pretty much left the team in disaster, and for just one player, and it was for one offensive receiver, and it got them nowhere. So Tampa Bay has to look next year in 2016 and go, we have to work on the defense for next year. Overall, I think Winston can be their franchise quarterback. This draft is a success, bar none. This is a quarterback-driven league. So if Winston is a success, this draft is a success. Let's get to the Washington Redskins. Now, early on, right leading up to the draft, I thought Brandon Sheriff and Amari Cooper were going to be dark horses for the Redskins. Because, I mean, even Leonard Williams. But as we saw, the Redskins passed on Leonard Williams. Surprisingly, even though he's the safest pick in the draft, or that's what he was called. And I thought, you know, it's a quarterback-driven league. I thought, you know, maybe they would get Amari Cooper if he fell to number 5. Maybe Brandon Sheriff to help protect RG3 from another knee injury. But mostly I thought it would be Leonard Williams if he was there. Even though he was there, the Redskins passed on him for Brandon Sheriff to get protection for RG3. And personally, I like the pick. I think, you got to keep your quarterback upright. You know, they got Trent Williams on the left side. Now they got Sheriff on the right side. Now they got 2 bookend tackles to help keep RG3 upright. Brian Arapko, he left the team. He went to Tennessee. They get Preston Smith out of Mississippi State to help replace him. They got Matt Jones in round 3 out of Florida. Jamison Crowder out of Duke. He's probably going to be a returner, help on special teams. But I will say, outside of the top couple picks, it's not really much to brag about for Washington this year coming out of the draft. But their main goal was to make sure to keep RG3 healthy. And they even got Ari Kuyangio out of Alabama in the 4th round. Another guard, another offensive lineman. So, again, you see teams that are trying to protect their quarterback, and why NFL owners are to blame. And with all these contracts, $100 million contracts being thrown out there, you got to keep your quarterback healthy, especially because they did pick up his option for 2016. As I watched the draft, I will say, I thought when Leonard Williams got past Oakland, I thought, okay, Washington's going to take him. Washington took Sheriff instead. So I thought, okay, where's Williams going to fall? And the Jets were the last team I thought would take him. So I thought, wow, the Bears are moving to a 3-4 defense, and they're most likely going to get the best player in the draft to fit that scheme perfectly. And then the Jets took Leonard Williams. But that did allow them to fill another hole, because they shipped Brandon Marshall to the Jets, and they replaced him with Kevin White. Not sure that's going to solve the Jay Cutler problem in Chicago, because it's quite funny. The Bears were even trying to go up and get Marcus Mariota in a trade with the Titans, and they couldn't even get the Titans to take Jay Cutler. So what does that tell you about how they feel about him? Here they go and they said, hey, you know what? Marshall's gone. You got Alshon Jeffrey. Here's Kevin White. Jay Cutler, do something. Take us to the damn playoff. We didn't give you a contract for nothing. And as I said, they're moving to a 3-4 defense, so they get themselves a nose tackle, and Eddie Goldman out of Florida State. Once again, shoring up the offensive line with Grasu out of Oregon in the 3rd round. Jeremy Langford, round 4. Needs somebody to kind of take the load off of Matt Forte. And, John Fox, being in Carolina, he had John Stewart, he had D'Angelo Williams. So now he kind of got Forte and he got Langford now. He can rotate back and forth like he did in Carolina. I don't see where the Bears and the Vikings can really jump into the race and make it interesting. So, might be another year or two before we're talking about the Lions and the Bears in the same sentence as the Lions and the Packers when it comes to the division race. But they will get there. They just need to get a better quarterback. Somebody that's not Jay Cutler. Well, let's move down to the South, where the Atlanta Falcons played in the NFC Sucks. NFC Sucks. And FC Sucks. That's my new name for the NFC South. Because the NFC South sucked last year. We're talking 2010 NFC West suckage. That's how bad the NFC South was last year. Now, this year, it's going to be interesting to see how many wins it takes to win the division this year. And I look at Atlanta as the next team on the list here. They may be a little bit improved. It's going to be interesting to see how Dan Quinn incorporates what he did in Seattle over into Atlanta. Gus Bradley, he's doing that in Jacksonville. But for Dan Quinn, Atlanta's got a pretty good established roster. I talked about their offense. I talked about the Julio Jones thing, trading away so many picks for him and abandoning the defense. So hopefully with Dan Quinn now being a defensive coordinator, coming in where the defense was a bit of a problem in Atlanta. I still remember that blowout last year, Week 17, for the division, Carolina versus Atlanta. And the Falcons, they didn't even try to play for Mike Smith. They didn't even try to win the division. The Panthers just blew them out completely. I think Dan Quinn, this year, that's going to change. Because he went out and he said, you know what? We're going to get to the quarterback. We're going to chase down Cam Newton. We're going to chase Drew Brees. We're going to chase Jameis Winston. Because they got Vic Beasley, probably the best pure pass rusher in the draft. By far. Honestly, I thought he should have been the number 3 pick to Jacksonville over Dante Fowler. Fowler, again, great talent. Go back and listen to my AFC reaction if you want to hear my thoughts on that pick. So I think Atlanta really upgraded their pass rush. Something that they struggled with last year. And then, they're switching to the 4-3 with Quinn coming over from Seattle. One of the things in Seattle they're known for is that secondary. So, after Carolina blew them out in a big blowout loss in Week 17, well, Dan Quinn wants to make sure that doesn't happen again. He went out and got some tall corners in this draft. Well, 2 of them actually, but the one that I really like is Jalen Collins, the cornerback of LSU. Now, granted, okay, he only made 10 starts at LSU. He's a very talented corner. A lot of people pegged him in the 1st round. He fell to Atlanta in the 2nd round. Tremendous value pick. 6'1". Now, go to the end of the draft. Round 7. A converted receiver, Akeem King. 6'3" out of San Jose State. So, you can tell, Atlanta, he wants to bring the Legion of Boom to to Atlanta. So he's getting some tall corners that can match up with the receivers in the National Football League. And that's what you see a lot of is teams going for tall corners now because these receivers coming out 6'3", 6'4", 6'5". They need corners that can match up with these receivers one-on-one. So for Atlanta, they are trying to do that. They are trying to upgrade that secondary. And like I said, Vic Beasley, I love the pick. I think he's going to drastically improve their pass rush, and he's going to help their defense from day one. Tevin Coleman, round 3, great pick. Round 4, Justin Hardy. Harry Douglas left in free agency, so they need a guy that can replace him. Justin Hardy might be the guy. Like I said, this is pretty much a reaction type of video, so I'm not going to go through every pick, but just the picks that are just kind of notable. And it's a shame that Fowler tore his ACL, because I think the Defensive Rookie of the Year battle would have been fun to watch between Fowler and Beasley. So, moving from Atlanta to New York, the New York Football Giants. Now it's quite interesting that Tom Coughlin is getting a pass for his 2 Super Bowl rings, and the Giants have struggled to make the playoffs as of late. So, picking 9th. Picking in the top 10, that's, I don't know how much longer they can go giving him a pass. But, what I will say though, I do like their draft, because the first 2 picks, specifically I should say, because Eli Manning struggled last year, and they need to, once again, I go back to Jameis Winston, I go back to what I said, everybody wants to protect their quarterback. They take Eric Flowers out of Miami. Now, granted, before William Betty got hurt, the whole plan was to move Justin Pugh inside into right guard with Flowers at right tackle. Now, very shockingly, as I said in my AFC reaction video, that I was surprised the Colts passed on Landon Collins. Heck, I was surprised he even fell out of the first round. So, the Giants were smart enough to realize the talent that he has, and they called Tennessee on the second day of the draft and said, hey, we want up. They made a trade. They got Landon Collins. 2 great picks by the Giants. I love it. Now, here's the thing that I do want to bring up. They have to protect Eli Manning, but the problem is Eli Manning going in a decline? Was last year kind of the beginning of the end for Eli Manning in New York? Are the Giants going to start having to look for a new franchise quarterback? Because he did throw a lot of interceptions last year. So, you have to wonder, is the Eli Manning era coming to an end? The Rams. They're a talented team, but at some point they have to put it together. And they traded away Sam Bradford. They got Nick Foles now. So, they got to put it together. Jeff Fisher is running out of time, and they're not going to wait any much longer. Especially if they end up going to Los Angeles. I mean, that's going to be a lot of high pressure, and high pressure to perform. And if Jeff Fisher doesn't do that, then he's going to be out as head coach, and then we bring in somebody new. So they have got to show that they can do good this year. So they went ahead and brought in Todd Gurley at 10th pick of the draft. Tremendous pick. I think that's going to help Nick Foles out a lot. As I said with San Diego, I think this allows them to kind of take pressure off of Phillip Rivers when they selected Melvin Gordon. So I think with Nick Foles, this kind of allows him to kind of dial it back a little bit. He can hand the ball off to Gurley. As I talked about, the Rams took a whole bunch of offensive linemen. Rob Havenstein in the 2nd round. Jamin Brown, 3rd round. Round 4, Andrew Donnell. Cody Wickman in round 6. So they're really trying to shore up that offensive line. Trying to do what Dallas did over 3 years in one draft. They lost Joseph Barksdale to a 1-year deal to the San Diego Chargers. So it looks to me, Jamon Brown out of Louisville, he seems to be penciled in at right guard. And then you look at Rob Havenstein, who very well could be penciled in at right tackle. So they're going to have to really gel quickly in order to keep Nick Foles protected. And if you notice, they took Todd Gurley. A lot of these offensive linemen they took, Havenstein, Brown, these guys are good run blockers. So they are setting up to be a run-first team, it seems. maybe Nick Foles won't be asked to do much at all. Quite potentially, maybe a franchise quarterback for the future. Sean Mannion out of Oregon State. Maybe he's going to sit behind Nick Foles and develop for a little bit. Now they did add Bryce Hager and Martin Ifedi in round 7. So they added some more defensive. They had 2 defensive players, but most of this was an offensive draft. Whether it's the Rams or somebody else, whoever goes to Los Angeles is going to have to win, because it's been proven Los Angeles is not that much of a football crowd. So it's going to take a lot to get fans, especially if you're not winning. Alright, let's go to Minnesota, where Mike Zimmer already has his influence on the Vikings. They were a very, very competitive team last year. Even with Teddy Bridgewater, I think the Vikings are on the right track. They are going to have a chance to succeed. Trey Waynes. Now, I had Trey Waynes kind of in the middle between Washington at 5 all the way to about the early 20s with Detroit. We've seen in recent drafts cornerbacks fall. Cornerbacks have fallen, so it's really hard to kind of gauge where they could go. And I thought, maybe Atlanta. He's 6 foot. Dan Quinn, as I mentioned earlier, trying to do what they did in Seattle. Atlanta could be a spot for him. And that was if Vic Beasley or Fowler wasn't available. The one position that it seems like a lot of teams underestimate is the inside linebacker position. You see these guys, they fall, and they're very talented. I mean, look at C.J. Mosley. I think last year with the Ravens when they took him, it was kind of one of those picks like, why would they take an inside linebacker that high when the position is starting to be devalued a little bit? So that's why Ray Maluga, when he came out, seen as a first-round pick, and then he fell to the second round, and that's pretty much what happened to Eric Kendricks. Eric Kendricks, a lot of people had him at the bottom of round 1, possibly going to Denver, going to Green Bay, but he fell to the Minnesota Vikings, in which case he is penciled in as their starter at inside linebacker at this moment. They tried to get Michael Johnson after he was released from Tampa after 1 year, so you knew they were going to be looking for a pass rusher in this draft when he decided to go back to Cincinnati. So they took Danielle Hunter in round 3. I actually paid Hunter in the second round because I thought his upside would be put him in at middle of round 2. TJ Clemmings, another guy. A lot of people said, he's first, second round pick, but he fell to the 4th round. Kind of reminds me of Bruce Campbell when he came out, because everybody was like, Bruce Campbell is going to be a first, second round or whatever, but then he fell to the 4th round. Similar situation, and it looks like TJ Clemmings right now is going to be the starting right guard for the Minnesota Vikings. So they're going to have about 2 rookies minimum, possibly 3 starting for the Vikings this year. I love this pick so much. Round 5, Stephon Diggs out of Maryland. Now, I'm not sure about his receiving ability too much, but I think in the NFL, I think he's going to be a great return man in the NFL. I think he's going to have more of the potential of being Devin Hester, Josh Cribbs, more so than a great receiver that can be a difference maker on offense. I think for Minnesota, he can actually give them great field position, return some kicks for touchdowns. I think that is going to be huge for Minnesota in terms of that. So I think Minnesota is building something pretty good here with Mike Zimmer. I think Michael Johnson over there, who went back to Cincinnati, kind of made a little bit of a... I think he made a little mistake, because I feel like a lot of Cincinnati's great defenses was because of Mike Zimmer. So I think he would have flourished over here in Minnesota instead of going back to Cincinnati, where I think he'll struggle just because Mike Zimmer is no longer the defensive coordinator over there. And as I said, I gave an order of how the teams picked. So 12 obviously was the Browns. So I gotta go to 13 with the New Orleans Saints, who surprised some people on day one when they took Andreas Pete, the offensive tackle out of Stanford. I think a lot of people had Trey Waynes. I think a lot of people had pass rusher and inside linebacker. They had, all these other positions. And then the Saints are going to take Andreas Pete to shore up their offensive line to make sure that they're protecting an aging Drew Brees. Now, again, this takes us back to the NFC South. And, it's funny because the Saints decided to throw everybody a loop this year. And they said, all right, Jimmy Graham, we just gave you a big contract last year, but you know what? We're going to give you away and trade you away to Seattle. So now we've got Josh Hill, who Sean Payton is talking up as a potential replacement for Jimmy Graham. And I think a lot of people thought with the Saints, they're going to go and take a tight end. They're going to find a replacement for Jimmy Graham. And then lo and behold, they're going to go with Josh Hill at tight end, and instead they found a replacement potentially for Drew Brees in round 3 with Garrett Grayson. That's going to be interesting to watch. Stephon Anthony at the end of round 1 with the pick they got from Seattle. Inside linebacker has been a weak position for the Saints, so they needed to upgrade badly there, and they did. And they need to get to the quarterback. So they got Haholi Kikiai out of Washington. So now they got the linebacker core kind of straightened out there. And let's not forget, they did bring in Anthony Spencer. And they're going to probably have to lean on Halehi because Junior Gillette is under some kind of under investigation or something with some video that came out. So he may not be able to play this year at all. I mean, they did a lot of things in New Orleans this year that was quite very odd. Another thing that I thought was strange to me was they traded away Kenny Stills to Miami, which was so strange to me because they traded him for Daniel Ellerbe, who has basically been a bust ever since he left Baltimore and signed with the Dolphins. Doesn't make any sense to me. I still don't get why teams sign anybody from the Ravens because they seem to always bust when they leave the nest. So they shipped out Kenny Stills. They shipped out Jimmy Graham. So the Saints are kind of starting to try to rebuild. Like I said, they got Garrett Grayson there as a replacement for Drew Brees in the future. So it seems the Saints are starting to kind of rebuild a little bit. Trying to get a head start on it, I should say, instead of waiting for Drew Brees to go away and retire. Now, when I get to the Panthers, I will say this. I will tell you how many wins I think will win the NFC South this year. I've analyzed the schedules of all 4 teams, and I can tell you it's going to be a lot higher than it was last year. Because I do see improvement in New Orleans and Atlanta. So Tampa Bay is going to be another couple years away from competing, but I think it's going to be a 3-team race this year in the NFC South and to be really competitive. And now we'll move on to the ever so retirement happy San Francisco 49ers, who are, unlike the Saints, 49ers are in complete rebuild mode. This whole off season has been a disaster for them from the beginning. First, they run Jim Harbaugh out of town, which was so stupid to do, because before Jim Harbaugh got to San Francisco, the 49ers were an underperforming team. They did not have a winning season, and they just went through head coaches left and right. Jim Harbaugh brought a lot of stability, and then they run him out of town. And then all of a sudden, Patrick Willis retires. Justin Smith, Anthony Davis, starting right tackle, he's going to take a year or so off. Chris Borland, a rookie last year, he retired after 1 season in the NFL. That team is a disaster right now. A lot of people say that they're not going to have a good year, that this is going to definitely be a rebuilding year for the 49ers. Of Quite personally, I think they're going to regret running Jim Harbaugh out of town. It reminds me very much so of what happened in San Diego between Marty Ball and general manager A.J. Smith. They had to decide between Marty Ball or A.J. Smith. Well, very similar, either Trent Belly or Jim Harbaugh. And once again, just like the Chargers, they made a stupid mistake and ran the head coach out of town instead of the general manager. History repeats itself, folks. But he's off in Michigan now, so good luck, Jim Tomsula, because you are going to need all the luck in the world in order to properly succeed Jim Harbaugh in San Francisco. Michael Iupati, he left to go to Arizona, and they're going to just plug in Brandon Thomas, a rookie they drafted last year. I mean, they're linebackers this year now with Patrick Willis and Chris Borland retired. Navarro Bowman is coming back, so that's a good thing for them. But now they're going to go with unknown Michael Iupati, who, well, like I said, complete unknown. And a lot of people, again, pegged maybe Eric Kendricks to the 49ers at 17. But they went ahead and got Eric Armstead. And they didn't even draft an inside linebacker, so, not good. I do like the additions of Eli Harold in round 3, Blake Bell in round 4, because I think they're going to be huge for them this year. I think with Vernon Davis, on his last legs, they needed some fresh legs there at tight end. Aldon Smith, he's always in trouble, it seems like, and he may be on his last legs in the NFL. So Eli Harold is a good insurance policy. And I really thought Eli Harold was a good steal too, because I had him paid at the end of round 1, round 2. So to get him in round 3 is quite a steal. And then recently they just shipped out Andy Lee to Cleveland because they drafted Bradley Pinion in round 5 to be their new punter. It's going to be interesting to watch the 49ers this year. With all the retirements that happened, it has to make you wonder, did we see the last of the Seahawks-49ers rivalry now with Jim Harbaugh gone? Is it now going to become Pete Carroll versus Bruce Arians, Seahawks versus Cardinals for the NFC West this year? Or can the Rams actually live up to their potential and make it a 3-man race? Who knows? But as I said, just like when the Chargers got rid of Marty Ball, I don't see this working out very well for them either. And speaking of which, a team that might be just as filled with question marks as the 49ers, the Philadelphia Eagles. Boy, oh boy, I hope Chip Kelly knows what he's doing over there. This is not college football, Chip. This is the NFL. I mean, you went out there and you redid the whole secondary, and you signed Byron Maxwell from Seattle. You just cut Evan Mathis, who's still a free agent, so he must be taking his time at picking his next team. You shipped off LaShawn McCoy, of all people, and you ship him off to Buffalo for Kiko Alonso, another Oregon player, and which is quite funny because before the NFL leveled a suspension to Deion Jordan, the Eagles and the Dolphins were kind of talking trade, and Chip Kelly was going to acquire another Oregon player in Deion Jordan before the suspension was announced. So he's trying to make Oregon East over here in Philadelphia. Even though it's quite funny because the whole draft, they never took a single Oregon player. They continue their makeover with the secondary. Eric Rowe, added him in round 2. They added a receiver to replace Jeremy Maclin, who went to receiver hell, is what I call Kansas City, because Alex Smith cannot throw deep ball, and he's not that good of a quarterback, so not sure why Jeremy Maclin went to Kansas City other than for the money. But they need to replace him, so they got Nelson Aguilar in round 1, which was kind of a reach, I think. I think they could have traded back and still got him, but, Mike Mayock called him a young Jeremy Maclin, and that's who they were trying to replace. is Jeremy Maclin, so we'll see how that works. But, they go out and they bring in DeMarco Murray, they bring in Ryan Matthews to help replace LaShawn McCoy. It's crazy, right? Chip Kelly's going all out there in Philly like, you know what, we don't need this guy, He's going to do things his way. He's taken a lot of criticism, but you know what? He's doing things his way. And I don't think he cares about what people's opinions are. Especially if it works out on the field and they're a competitive team, they're in the playoffs. Let's go back to the draft. Beginning of it. There's all this trade talk. Oh, the Eagles are going to go up and get Marcus Mariota. And there's going to be this 3-team trade so the Eagles can get him. Well, that never amounted to nothing. So they went ahead and they got Sam Bradford from the Rams, in which the case they sent Nick Foles to St. Louis. Oh, and then the Eagles signed Tim Tebow, in which case this is the only mention of Tim Tebow throughout this whole show. We have not seen Tim Tebow in years. I think he's been a college broadcaster, college football broadcaster since he's been out of the NFL. So we don't know what he brings to the table. We know Sam Bradford, he's injury prone. They got Mark Sanchez. And it's quite funny, they got Sanchez and Tebow on the same team. And they happen to play the Patriots and the Jets this year. And like I said, I think the big question is, after moving LaShawn McCoy, getting rid of Evan Mathis, doing all these little things, all these little Chip Kelly things, to make it his team, will it translate to success on the field? And I think that is going to be the question of whether or not Chip Kelly succeeds in Philadelphia as their head coach. Bar none. This season is it for Chip Kelly. If all this moving doesn't do any good for them, we may be looking at him being on the hot seat in 2016. So that is going to do it for part 1 of my NFC Draft reaction. Join me for part 2 tomorrow, July 6th, as I will continue discussing my NFC Draft reaction, and I will get to my big discussion on training camp holdouts. You do not want to miss it. Tomorrow, July 6th, make sure you tune in, subscribe to my channel below, go back and watch all my other videos, because, as I said, I have a very interesting case if you look at the quarterback contracts of why the NFL owners are to blame. And while we're sitting here waiting for the answer to Tom Brady's appeal, go back and listen to my original reaction to his suspension and my AFC Draft reaction if you've missed that. See you once again tomorrow for part 2 of my NFC Draft reaction and my big discussion on training camp holdouts, and I'll give a reality check to the NFL players about how their holdouts are so ridiculously stupid. I'm your host, Money Mike. Enjoy the rest of your 4th of July weekend, and I'll see you tomorrow for part 2 of this discussion.